Jake slowly opened his eyes to the soft morning light spilling through the thin curtains of his small, cluttered apartment. The air smelled faintly of coffee and yesterday's leftover takeout. Normally, mornings were a quiet ritual for him: shower, breakfast, a quick check of his son's homework, and the daily grind of work. But today, everything felt different. There was a tension in the air, something electric that he couldn't immediately place. His eyes flicked around the room, expecting to see the usual sights: the small coffee table littered with papers, his son's toy cars scattered across the floor, and the half-open laptop on the desk where he sometimes worked at night. Instead, what caught his attention was her. Sitting on the edge of his bed, legs crossed, hair slightly tousled, wearing what appeared to be his oversized hoodie, it was Ms. Harper. The school principal. The woman he'd always seen as untouchable, distant, professional, and strict. And yet, here she was, looking almost mischievous, completely at home in his personal space. Jake's heart immediately went into overdrive. His mind scrambled for logic, for explanations, but none came. "Ms. Harper?" he said cautiously, his voice a mixture of disbelief and something he couldn't quite name. She looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with amusement, and that teasing smile that made his chest tighten. "Morning," she said softly, leaning back slightly. "I guess last night was more interesting than I thought." Jake blinked, trying to process. Last night? Interesting? His memory was fuzzy. The edges were blurred, a combination of exhaustion, adrenaline, and something else he wasn't ready to admit even to himself. He remembered the dinner they had shared at his place, an innocent, friendly invitation that somehow turned into an evening neither of them had planned. He remembered her laughter, the way it had filled his small apartment, echoing off the walls, warm and vibrant. He remembered the way she leaned in a little too close when reaching for a coffee mug, the brush of her hand against his, sending a jolt through him. And then black. Now, seeing her here, in his clothes, in his bedroom, that memory came rushing back in flashes, moments of intimacy, laughter, shared warmth that had been entirely unexpected. The hoodie she wore hung loosely over her frame, a perfect mix of his familiar scent and her presence, and Jake realized just how distracting it was. Every muscle in his body tensed, and he had to fight the urge to sit down heavily, to process the surreal situation. I think you're in my hoodie?" he stammered, gesturing awkwardly. Ms. Harper looked down at herself, then back at him, tilting her head slightly. "Oh, this?" she said, her voice playful. "I think it's comfortable. And well, you weren't exactly wearing it last night." Her words hinted at more than he was ready to acknowledge, and his face flushed. Jake ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain composure. He'd never imagined waking up like this, alone, with his son at his mother's place for the morning, and a woman who had always been off limits, sitting right there, teasing him as if she owned the space. He could feel his pulse in his throat, his mind racing with questions, embarrassment, and a strange, unexpected thrill. "Okay," he started, taking a cautious step closer to the bed. "Last night. We need to talk about last night." His voice was steady, but internally, he was anything but calm. Ms. Harper's gaze met his, steady and unflinching, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of them suspended in this unspoken tension. "Or," she added softly, "we could just not talk. Sometimes, words ruin things." Jake froze at that, caught off guard by the sheer confidence and boldness in her tone. She wasn't acting like the strict, distant principal he knew from school. She was playful, daring, intimate, completely different from the woman he had always respected from afar. And that realization sent a mix of fear and excitement through him. He tried to organize his thoughts. How had this ever happened? He remembered inviting her for coffee after a long parent-teacher meeting, a casual gesture meant to show appreciation for her guidance with his son. He hadn't expected her to come. He certainly hadn't expected her to stay past the quick chat. But she had. She had stayed. And somewhere along the line, laughter had turned into lingering touches, touches had turned into quiet glances, and glances, well, they had turned into something that neither of them could define, something dangerous, thrilling, and utterly intoxicating. Jake's chest tightened. He felt a mixture of guilt, desire, and fear swirling inside him. This was Ms. Harper, the woman who held authority over his son's school life, a woman who should be untouchable, professional. And yet, here she was, daring to cross boundaries, daring to make his heart race, daring to make him question everything he thought he knew about control, about propriety, about himself. "Jake," she said, her voice cutting through his spiraling thoughts. He turned toward her, and she smiled softly, almost tenderly. "I didn't mean to stay the night. She paused, looking down at her hands then back at him. I wanted to." The simplicity of that statement, the raw honesty behind it, left him momentarily speechless. There was no justification, no explanation, no apology, just a truth that hung in the air between them, palpable and electric. Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Right, okay," he finally managed. "Well, I guess that makes this morning interesting." She laughed softly, a sound that made his chest tighten again. "Interesting?" she teased, leaning back on the bed, her eyes scanning his face, as if reading every thought he didn't dare say aloud. "I'd call it unforgettable." Jake shifted uncomfortably, his hands twitching as he tried to find a neutral stance, a way to navigate the moment without tripping over the sheer intensity of it. His mind raced through every possible scenario. How would this affect their professional relationship? His son? The neighborhood gossip that seemed to find its way everywhere? And yet, none of that mattered right now. Right now, the only thing that mattered was her presence, the warmth of the oversized hoodie she wore, and the way her eyes held his in a gaze that seemed to challenge him, dare him, and tease him all at once. "Ms. Harper," he began cautiously. We should probably get dressed. Coffee? Breakfast? Something to make this feel normal." His voice trailed off, betraying the uncertainty he felt inside. She tilted her head, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "Normal is overrated," she said softly, her tone carrying a weight of promise and mischief that made him shiver. "But maybe coffee isn't a bad idea." Jake exhaled, relief and tension mingling in equal measure. "Okay, coffee it is," he said, forcing a small smile, though his heart was still pounding like a drum in his chest. He couldn't ignore the thought that this morning would linger in his mind forever. How a simple, ordinary start to a day had transformed into something so chaotic, so thrilling, so utterly unforgettable. As he moved to the kitchen, she followed, the oversized hoodie swaying slightly with each step, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the lingering aroma of coffee. It was a surreal scene, a blend of the mundane and the extraordinary, and Jake knew, without a shred of doubt, that his life had just shifted, in a way he hadn't expected, and couldn't ignore. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, the steam rising between them like a veil of normalcy over something undeniably intimate. She took hers with a soft, "Thank you," her fingers brushing his for just a moment, a spark that sent shivers down his spine. He tried to focus on stirring his own mug, on finding a place for his thoughts, but his eyes kept darting to her. Every detail of her presence, the curve of her smile, the softness of her hair, the way she seemed utterly at ease in his space, kept him off balance. Finally, he found the courage to speak, his voice low and uncertain. "So, about last night." She met his gaze, eyes twinkling, lips curved in that infuriatingly confident smile. "Jake, some things don't need explaining. Some things just are." And in that moment, Jake realized that he didn't need explanations. That maybe, just maybe, the chaotic, unexpected, and utterly thrilling way she had entered his life was exactly what he didn't know he needed. He sat back, taking a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him. And though 1,000 questions swirled in his mind, about boundaries, about consequences, about what the future held, he couldn't deny one thing. This morning, unlike any other, was unforgettable. And somewhere deep inside, he felt a spark of anticipation. For what was coming next. For what they had started. For a connection that neither had expected, but both clearly wanted.